thank y'all so much for being here. I have the privilege tonight of introducing my dad, Congressman Barry Loudermilk. And you know, when you're introducing a family member, you have a pretty big decision to make. How much do you share? How many family secrets do you divulge? But instead of sharing his bio, his list of accomplishments, which are impressive and something I'm so thankful for, I thought what I would share is one of the most important lessons that he has taught me, especially when it comes to standing for faith and freedom. And that was that it's not just important to know what you're standing for. It's important to know why you're standing for what you're standing for. And this lesson started one cold November night as my dad woke me and my two brothers up from our beds, grabbed us, our mom, and several armfuls of campaign signs, and we started driving voting precinct to voting precinct. Now raise your hand if you have partaken in this fun election eve activity. I'm sure many of you have. And I thought it was great. We were having a blast. But I didn't understand what in the world, why in the world we were doing this. So finally, as my dad is driving into the red Georgia clay, one of those signs that they're bending at the bottom and it's impossible to get into the ground, I said, "Dad, why are we doing this?" And he just looked up at me and he said, "You are why." And I understood what he meant, and he went on and he said, "Because it matters to you and your future that we elect school board members, state house members, members of Congress that represent our values, that understand the purpose of government and the limits of the Constitution. You are why, because I want you to have a nation that's free, safe, and full of opportunity." And I understood as far as a 10-year-old can. But it wasn't until my first reason why my daughter was born that I truly began to grasp what he meant. It was almost 4 years ago that we welcomed her into the world, and since then, we've welcomed another beautiful daughter, and we actually have one more on the way. And thank you. And as our reasons why continue to increase, so does our understanding of why we stand. So I continued to understand this lesson a little more one night as we were preparing for an event just like this, and we were stuffing donation packets just like the ones on your table. We were putting the envelopes with the donation form, putting them in the larger envelopes, and our daughter was right there with all of her might, helping in every way she could, when she just casually said, "Mommy, what are we doing?" And I said, "Well, we're creating a way that kind people who love America are going to be able to invest in the work we're doing in educating voters and sharing our values and advocating at the Capitol for the values we believe in." And she kind of understood, and then she looked at me as if she was reading my dad's mind. And she said, "But Mommy, why are we doing this?" And I thought back to 20 years before when I asked my dad that same question. And I fought back the tears a little as I told her, "You are why. Because I want you to have a nation that's free, that you can do or be anything God calls you to be." So my daughter got up and she walked out of the room, and thinking I totally lost her at this point, until a few minutes later when she walked back in. She was carrying her little pink purse, which she unzipped. She pulled out the $3 she'd been given for her birthday a week before, and she said, "Here, Mommy, put this in your envelope." And then there was no more fighting back tears as I sat there crying, realizing it's so important what we're standing for. And I just thought about my dad and that lesson he taught me, that you can't just know what you're standing for, what you're fighting for. You have to know why you're standing for it. And the reason that my dad has been standing all these years, is because he has wanted to hand to me and to my children the torch of freedom burning just as brightly today as it was when his father served in World War II to defend it, when his brother served in the Coast Guard to defend it, and when my own dad served during Desert Shield to defend it. And I know every one of you agrees with me that on our watch, that torch of freedom will be burning brightly as we pass it to our children and our grandchildren. Now, I am honored to introduce a businessman, a family man, a former member of the State House and the State Senate, a veteran of the United States Air Force, but most importantly, my dad, Congressman Barry Loudermilk.
How do you follow that? How many just want me to bring Christiana back out and let her finish? It's, wow, what a night. I was trying to remember how many of these events here in Georgia and the national event that I've been to, and I just couldn't remember. It's been many, but every year it gets bigger and it gets better. And it's every year more important to have you here, to have us together in this fight for our freedom. Now, I'll be honest, I was a little nervous when I got here this morning, or this afternoon, because I realized one thing, that two of my high school classmates were here, and I got a little concerned that they may go tell some stories. But then before you ask, what about that Coast Guard pipe band? Was that not awesome? That was, as Christiana was saying, she holds back tears. Of course, I was doing the same backstage as she was introducing, but whenever they go into Amazing Grace, that really gets me. Now, if you missed the introduction of the leader of the pipe band, his name was M.L. Loudermilk. Before you ask, yes, that's my older brother. And because he's my older brother, I can't claim that I taught him everything he knows. Look, we're in a very interesting time in this nation. And as I go across the state and even across the country speaking with people, I keep hearing people say, we're in this unprecedented time in our country and I don't know how we're going to save this nation. But if you think about it, the Bible tells us there is nothing new under the sun. Now, the time that we're in right now may be unprecedented in our lifetimes, but there's nothing we're facing that somewhere in our history as a nation or as our faith as Christian people has not been challenged in the past. And I would submit to you that even the challenges we're facing today that may seem insurmountable to us are not even as extreme as some in our past have faced before. I think part of it is because maybe we've become a little bit weaker. We've been maybe a little bit detached. Maybe we don't understand exactly, as a people, everyone here does, but as a people of the United States, how blessed we really are to have this nation, founded upon the concept of freedom and dedicated to the purpose that we will preserve this freedom for future generations. And I say that because so often, even from our own side, I get calls from people wanting us in Washington to fix every problem that they have in this country, or the state legislature to fix every problem we have in this state. You see, I agree with the framers of our Constitution, whose biggest fear was the very government that they were creating, because they understood one thing. When someone or some entity receives power, they seek more power. I don't trust our government. I love our country. I don't trust the government. We should have a healthy distrust of government. We should hold our government accountable. The government is accountable to everyone in here. Some people in Washington have forgotten that. But when people call me and they want me to fix problems, let me tell you something. I'm not here to fix your problems. I'm here to ensure you continue to have the freedom to fix your own problems. Because every time we turn to government for government to fix the problems we have, it empowers the government, and then we complain about the government having too much control over our lives. You know, we've been under this attack from the very beginning. Our faith first went under attack when God created Adam and Eve. What happened? Satan showed up, and we were under attack. Our freedom has been under attack since the Pilgrims landed in 1620 and created a civil body politic as the Mayflower Compact described. Our freedoms have continued to be under attack throughout the history of this nation, including September 11 and continuing on throughout where we are today. There are people in our own nation that want to strip our freedoms. This is nothing new. I appreciate where Mac, my son-in-law, by the way, he started off talking about World War II. And as Christiana mentioned, my brother and my dad, he was a medic in World War II. Loved history. Used to tell us these incredible stories about World War II. Interestingly, though, being a medic, he never talked much about his own experiences. Which told me, yes, I knew this guy was in combat because he didn't want to talk about what he's seen. But he would talk about others. He would talk about the various battles. And one that he told me about that I knew he was engaged in was the Battle of the Bulge. Now, this is near the end of World War II. The Allies, Canadians, United States, England specifically, had been engaged with the Germans, and we had driven them out of France and out of Holland and across back into Germany. We held up at the old Siegfried Line, which was a line that had been established in World War I. It still had fortifications there. But winter had set in. It was bad weather. But Hitler was not going to give up. He launched one final assault. He had secretly amassed a force on the other side of the Siegfried Line, and on December the 18th, he started a massive push called the Battle of the Bulge, as we know it today, where he broke right through the Allied lines. In fact, it started a massive retreat. It was known as the Great GI Bug Out. His objective was to push the Allied forces back and extend the war so he could negotiate a more favorable surrender. We were unmatched. Heavy artillery, tanks. We had a lot of green troops that were brought up to the front. My father was in Holland at the time. He was part of the 101st Medical Evacuation Hospital. I actually have a picture of him with two little girls from Holland that he was giving chocolate bars to, actually wearing wooden shoes. Most everybody thought the war was over with. We were caught unprepared. General Eisenhower had captured some intelligence information that we realized that the objective was two towns, the town of St. Vith and the town of Bastogne. Those two towns had bridges that were heavy enough or strong enough to hold the weight of the Panzer tanks. Eisenhower sent the 101st Airborne to Bastogne and the 82nd Airborne to St. Vith. Their orders, hold the towns at all cost. Still refitting from Operation Market Garden, the 101st Airborne was not ready for combat again, but immediately they went to Bastogne because freedom was under assault. They landed, and with 4 hours of getting into Bastogne, the town was surrounded by superior Nazi forces with artillery and tanks. We had nothing more than M1 carbines and maybe a few bazookas. Because of the weather, they were socked in. The Army Air Corps could not respond. After a couple of days of continual assault, the Germans stopped firing and they sent an envoy carrying a white flag to the American lines on the outskirts of Bastogne. And in it, they had a message from their commander. It was an ultimatum of surrender. So Colonel Clark, the chief of staff for General McAuliffe, the commander of the 101st Airborne, Colonel Clark took the the letter and he went into the office of General McAuliffe. And he said, "Sir, we have a surrender ultimatum from the Germans." He said at that point, General McAuliffe looked up at him and he said, "Well, Colonel, tell the Germans we'll accept their surrender." A little set back by this, Colonel Clark said, "No, sir. They're demanding we surrender." He said, "Us surrender? Nuts." Now, some in history have said that he was just being jovial, trying to lighten the mood. But Colonel Clark said, no, he was serious. When he said, "I have a surrender ultimatum from the Germans," General McAuliffe knew it had to be them offering surrender because his orders were hold the town at all costs. So surrender was not in his vocabulary. But if you sit back and you think about it, we're surrounded. Innocent civilians' lives are at risk. His own men's lives are at risk. The circumstances spell disaster. Is not the way to preserve freedom and preserve life to just surrender? I mean, the war is going to be over at some point and we will win. But the orders were hold the town at all cost. They were trying to figure out how to respond to the German demands, and God bless a butter bar lieutenant who spoke up and he said, "General, I think what you said earlier is appropriate." And they said, "What's that?" He said, "Nuts." So General McAuliffe writes nuts on the surrender ultimatum, hands it to Colonel Clark. He takes it back to the German captain. The German captain opens it up and he's a little confused, not understanding what this means. And he says, "Excuse me, Colonel, is this in the affirmative or the negative?" He said, "Captain, it's defiantly negative." The captain said, "Many Americans and civilians will lose their life because of your arrogance." And he said, "We will kill every German that tries to take this town." Why? Why would General McAuliffe take that standpoint when all the circumstances around him tells him he should do something different? Because he understood history. You see, the same thing happened at Valley Forge. We were at our lowest point in our war for independence. Our men were starving. They were sick. They were deprived. They were surrounded. They knew it was ultimate defeat once spring came and the winters and the snows passed away. But General Washington understood something, because he said it's important to have the spirit of a patriot, but it's more important to have the character of a Christian. He had a major in his ranks, who later became a colonel, but John Peter Gabriel Muhlenberg. He had been a pastor who was motivated to defend freedom by more than just preaching. He knew he had to fight. So Washington called upon him, and Washington mandated, and listen to this, ACLU, Washington mandated Christian services twice a day for every soldier in the Continental Army. That was the turning point in our American Revolution. Why? And this is what General McAuliffe knew, because George Washington gave them a cause to focus on. He said our freedom is tied to faith. Just as Jesus died on the cross for our freedom, we have to be willing to sacrifice everything for our family's freedom. He taught us, keep your eyes on your cause, not your circumstance, which means you have to have a well-defined cause. Our founders understood that, because as they were defining our nation in 1776, they gave us a document that defines what our cause is as a nation and sets the structure up for a government to achieve that cause. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to preserve these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. You see, this evolved into a constitution that set limits upon government. The government's job is to preserve the rights. You see, this became the cause for General McAuliffe. To preserve these ideas that were etched in our Declaration of Independence. Keep your eye on your cause, not your circumstance. We find ourselves in a very similar situation today. It's like everywhere we go, we're under attack. Our faith is under attack. We're trying to be canceled. Look, I've got a solution to avoid being canceled. Just refuse to be canceled. They try to take your First Amendment rights, speak louder. There is nothing new under the sun. We have faced these types of things in the past. And this is one thing that our opponents and our enemies understand. That if we get focused on our cause and we unify, we can't be stopped. But our challenge is that last word, unification. Far too often in Republican politics, because we're so dedicated to our ideas and our principles, when we're ready to go to battle, we empty half of our magazines on each other before we actually get into battle with the enemy. Now let me tell you something. I've been booed for making this comment before. But there is not a perfect candidate that's going to meet everybody's expectations. But every Republican I know is light years better than any Democrat that I've met in Washington, D.C. And let me tell you this. From my knowledge of world history, there's only been one perfect man. And in an election, they voted to crucify him. Folks, we have this torch of freedom that was handed to us. America is looking for all of us in this room today to provide leadership, to define our cause for which we're fighting, to stand up and be the leaders that they are looking for. They're hungry for truth. But I'm also reminded, as you look at this logo of faith and freedom, that faith comes first. Because without faith, there is no freedom. And my job, as I said, is to protect that freedom so that you can exercise your First Amendment right of speech and religion, do the Great Commission, spreading the gospel to all corners of the earth, to lead people because it is inherent for the survival of our nation, because John Adams warned us of this. He said, our Constitution is for a religious and moral people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other. And the reason he said that is because our Constitution sets up a limited government that exists to preserve rights. When you have a religious and moral society, guess what? We respect each other's rights. But when you lose your moral compass, then people tend to violate the rights of others out of greed and out of sin. The only way to counter that is get a more powerful government that only gets more power by taking away your liberty. So what that means is, this isn't my fight, this is our fight. We have a culture that is hungry for change, they're hungry for leadership, and it's time for us to stand up and say, yes, we as a nation can fix this. Don't rely on government, but rely on each other, and we can move forward. And as Christiana mentioned, we can restore this nation to be free, safe, and full of opportunity for generations to come. It ain't over. The battle is just beginning. God bless you. God bless America. Thank you.